I'm David, 38 male, and my parents told me I didn't deserve a penny of their inheritance because I was single and childless. They sat me down in the formal living room, the one with the furniture that was older than I was and infinitely more cherished, and explained that their legacy, their life's work, could only be entrusted to a son who had secured the family line. My younger brother, Ethan, had a wife and two beautiful children. He was, in their eyes, the vessel for the future. I, on the other hand, was a dead end. A successful architect, financially independent but ultimately a failure in their grand, dynastic ledger. What they didn't know was that in that moment of cold dismissal, they didn't just write me out of their will, they unleashed a part of me that I never knew existed. They set in motion a plan that would leave them with nothing but the hollow echo of their own misguided principles. The favoritism wasn't a new wound, it was a scar I had traced my entire life. My parents, Robert and Carol Sterling, were people who believed in clear, defined roles. My father, a man who built his fortune in commercial real estate, saw the world as a series of assets and liabilities. My mother, the perfect corporate wife, managed the family like a portfolio, prioritizing the investments that promised the greatest returns. From the very beginning, Ethan was their blue-chip stock, and I was the speculative venture they were never quite sure about. I remember my 12th birthday. I had spent months working on a detailed architectural model of a futuristic city for a national youth competition. It was intricate with tiered buildings, magnetic levitation transport, and a self-sustaining energy grid I'd designed after reading every book on the subject in the school library. I won first place in my age category. When I brought the trophy and the certificate home, my father glanced at it over the top of his newspaper. "Good work, son," he said, the words as empty as the box the model came in. "Don't get sawdust on the rug." That same evening, Ethan, who was 10, scored a single goal in his soccer game, a game his team lost 5-1. My parents threw a celebratory dinner at a fancy restaurant. My father clapped Ethan on the back, his voice booming with pride. "That's my boy, a real competitor. You see, David, that's the killer instinct you need in this world." I sat there, pushing a piece of overpriced steak around my plate, the gleam of my forgotten trophy seeming to dull under the restaurant's dim lights. This pattern only solidified as we grew older. When I graduated from architecture school with honors, my parents sent a polite card with a check inside, enough to cover a nice dinner but not enough to feel like a real celebration. It felt like a transaction, a settling of accounts. 2 years later, when Ethan graduated with a business degree and a C average, they threw him a party that was the talk of their social circle. They also gave him the down payment for a luxury condo downtown. Their justification was simple and, in their minds, perfectly logical. "Ethan needs a good start, David," my mother explained, her tone suggesting I was being difficult for even questioning it. "He'll be looking to attract the right kind of partner to build a family. You've always been so self-sufficient." Self-sufficient was their code word for alone. It wasn't a compliment, it was a label that excused their neglect. They interpreted my independence not as a strength I had developed, but as a sign that I didn't need them and therefore didn't deserve their support. The final and most telling example came when Ethan married his college sweetheart, Jessica. My parents spared no expense. The wedding was a monumental affair, a testament to the Sterling family's success and, more importantly, its continuity. During his toast, my father looked at Ethan and Jessica, his eyes glistening with emotion. "To the future," he said, raising his glass, "to the next generation of Sterlings." He didn't even glance in my direction. I was just part of the scenery, a supporting character in the grand production of Ethan's perfect life. A few years later, when their first child, Leo, was born, my parents' joy was boundless. They set up a trust fund for him that was, I later learned, more substantial than my entire life's savings at the time. Their second grandchild, Clara, was met with similar financial fanfare. I never fought it, I never screamed or demanded my fair share. What was the point? Their love wasn't something that could be divided equally. It was a targeted resource, allocated with strategic precision, so I focused on my career. I built my own firm from the ground up, pouring all the energy I might have given a family into my designs. I created spaces for other people to live, to work, to build their own lives, all while mine felt like an empty, unfurnished room. I dated, of course, but nothing ever felt permanent, perhaps on some subco. NCIS level, I had internalized their message. I was not the kind of man who built a family. I was the kind of man who built things. And for a long time, I thought that had to be enough. Until the day they called me into the living room and told me their temporary dismissal was now a permanent, legally binding reality. The summons came via a phone call from my mother on a Tuesday afternoon. Her voice had that specific, formal tone she used for family matters she considered official business. It was the same tone she'd used to inform me of a distant relative's passing or an upcoming change to the family's insurance policy. "David, your father and I need to speak with you," she said without any preamble. "Could you come to the house this Sunday, around 3?" It wasn't a request, the time was not a suggestion. It was a command delivered with the casual authority of a CEO scheduling a mandatory meeting. I knew instinctively that this wasn't about catching up. They never scheduled heartfelt chats. I agreed, a knot of cold apprehension tightening in my stomach. For the rest of the week, I replayed every recent interaction, searching for what I might have done wrong. Had I forgotten a birthday? Was my perfunctory Christmas gift not up to par? With my parents, affection was conditional, and I was perpetually on probation. I arrived at their house at 3 o'clock sharp. It was the house I grew up in, a large, imposing colonial-style structure that always felt more like a corporate headquarters than a home. The hedges were perfectly manicured, the paint was immaculate, and there was an unnerving silence about the place, as if any display of genuine, messy life was strictly forbidden. My mother opened the door before I could ring the bell. "David, you're on time," she said, as if I'd passed the first test. She led me not to the cozy family room in the back, but to the formal living room at the front of the house. It was a museum of their life, filled with stiff, antique furniture, photos of Ethan's family displayed prominently on the mantelpiece, and not a single recent photo of me. My father, Robert, was standing by the unlit fireplace, his hands clasped behind his back. He was a tall man, still imposing in his late 60s, with a face that seemed permanently etched with a look of stern evaluation. He didn't move to greet me, just nodded. "David, sit down." I sat on a velvet armchair that felt like it would shatter if I relaxed into it. The air was thick with unspoken words. My mother took her place on the matching sofa, her posture ramrod straight. My father cleared his throat. "David, your mother and I have been doing some estate planning," he began, his voice devoid of any warmth. "We're at an age where these things must be finalized. We wanted to be transparent with you about our decisions." I just nodded, my hands growing clammy. I knew this was it. This was the conversation I had been subconsciously dreading for years. "Your brother Ethan," he continued, "is in a different position in life than you are. He has a wife, 2 children, and the responsibilities that come with that. He is carrying the family name forward." My mother chimed in, her voice smooth and practiced, as if they had rehearsed this. "What we have built, David, this house, the business, our savings, it's a legacy. And a legacy is meant to be passed down to nurture the next generation. It needs to go where it can do the most good for the family's future." I remained silent, letting their words hang in the air. The good of the family was a phrase they used often, and it always meant the good of Ethan's family. "So we've made a decision," my father said, finally getting to the point. He looked me straight in the eye, his gaze unwavering and cold. "The estate in its entirety will be left to Ethan and his children. We've made sure Jessica is protected as well, of course. It's the only logical choice. The money needs to support those who are building our future." He paused, perhaps expecting an outburst, an argument. I gave him nothing. My mind felt strangely blank, like a circuit breaker had flipped. "We haven't forgotten you, of course," my mother added quickly, as if offering a cheap consolation prize. "We've allocated a sum for you, $100,000, a token of our affection so you know we care." $100,000. To them, with their multi-million-dollar estate, it was less than a rounding error. It was the amount they'd spend on a new car or a kitchen renovation. It wasn't an inheritance, it was a severance package. A fee for services rendered as their son for 38 years. "We trust you understand, David," my father said. His tone was final. It wasn't a discussion, it was a declaration. "You've done well for yourself, you have your firm, your apartment, you don't have the same needs as your brother, you don't have a family to provide for." That was the line that finally broke through T. He numbness, you don't have a family. They had looked at my life, my career I had built with my own 2 hands, my friendships, my existence, and deemed it empty, incomplete, unworthy of investment. They weren't just disinheriting me, they were invalidating my entire life. I slowly stood up, my legs felt unsteady. I looked from my father's stern, resolute face to my mother's placid, composed one. There was no malice in their eyes, which was somehow worse. There was just a certainty. A calm, unshakable belief in their own cold logic. They truly believed they were doing the right thing. "I understand," I said, and my voice was surprisingly steady. "Thank you for your transparency." I didn't shout, I didn't cry, I didn't plead my case. What would have been the point? You can't argue with a balance sheet. I was a liability they had decided to write off. In that moment, something inside me shifted permanently. It wasn't anger that filled the void, not yet. It was a profound and chilling clarity. The last fragile thread of hope I'd held onto, the childish belief that one day they would see me, truly see me, snapped. It was over, I was free. I walked out of the room, down the long hallway, and out the front door into the bright Sunday afternoon. I didn't look back. As I drove away, their perfect, imposing house shrinking in my rearview mirror, I wasn't thinking about the money. I was thinking about their word legacy. They had their definition of it, and I decided right then and there I was going to create my own. The days following that Sunday meeting were a blur of hollow routine. I went to work, I managed my team, I reviewed blueprints, but I felt like a ghost haunting my own life. The conversation with my parents played on a relentless loop in my mind. Their words, "You don't have a family," echoed in the empty spaces of my apartment. They had taken my biggest insecurity, my solitude, and fashioned it into a weapon. The hurt was a physical thing, a heavy weight in my chest that made it difficult to breathe. It wasn't the loss of the money. It was the loss of the illusion that I was, in some small way, a part of their world. I started avoiding people. Friends would call and I'd let it go to voicemail. I declined dinner invitations with flimsy excuses. I didn't want to explain my sudden melancholy. How could I? My parents officially confirmed I'm a disappointment. It sounded pathetic, childish. So I retreated into myself, the silence of my home becoming a crushing presence. One evening, about 2 weeks after the meeting, a colleague, Mark, insisted I join him at a charity gala. "It's for the Children's Literacy Fund," he'd said. "My wife is on the board. You need to get out, David. You look like you're designing a mausoleum, not a skyscraper." He was right. The thought of a crowded room filled with small talk was excruciating, but the thought of another night alone with my thoughts was worse. So I went. The ballroom was exactly as I'd expected. A sea of tuxedos and evening gowns, the air buzzing with forced laughter and the clinking of champagne glasses. I felt profoundly out of place, a spectator behind a wall of glass. I was nursing a club soda in a corner when a woman with a warm, genuine smile approached me. "You look like you'd rather be anywhere else," she said, her voice laced with amusement. I was taken aback by her directness. "Is it that obvious?" "Only to someone who feels the exact same way," she laughed. "I'm Anya Sharma." She introduced herself as one of the pediatricians affiliated with the charity. We started talking, and for the first time in weeks, the weight in my chest seemed to lighten. She wasn't interested in what I did for a living or who I knew. She was sharp, funny, and refreshingly down-to-earth. She spoke about her work with a passion that was captivating. She told stories about her patients, the resilient kids facing incredible hardships, and the joy of seeing them overcome their struggles. "The kids we work with," she explained, "they don't have the safety net that so many of us take for granted. A little support, a sense of stability, someone believing in them, it can change the entire trajectory of their lives." As she spoke, a thought began to form in my mind, blurry at first, then slowly coming into focus. I found myself telling her about my work as an architect, about how I loved creating spaces that fostered community and connection. And then, to my own surprise, the walls I had built around my pain began to crumble. "My parents," I started, the words feeling foreign and heavy, "they have a very traditional view of the world, of family. They believe legacy is only passed down through blood." Anya listened patiently, her gaze full of an empathy I hadn't realized I was starved for. "That's a very narrow way to see the world," she said softly. "I'm a single mom. My son is my entire world. Are we not a family because it's just the two of us? Is the family a child? Finds in a loving foster home not real. Family isn't about blood. It's about love, support, and showing up for people." Her words struck me with the force of a revelation. It's about showing up for people. My parents had never truly shown up for me. They had provided for me financially, yes, but emotionally they were absentee landlords of my heart. And Ethan, their golden child, was a tenant who paid his rent with grandchildren. It was in that moment, standing in a noisy ballroom with a near stranger, that the idea was born. It arrived fully formed, a perfect, intricate blueprint in my mind. My parents were obsessed with the sterling legacy. They wanted to pour their fortune into the future of their bloodline. What if I took their most prized possession, their name, and attached it to a legacy they would never be able to control? A legacy built on everything they disregarded: compassion, merit, and supporting those who had nothing. I could take my own savings, the money I had earned through the self-sufficiency they used as an excuse to sideline me, and create something meaningful. A foundation. A foundation dedicated to helping kids like the ones Anya worked with. Kids who didn't have a family fortune waiting for them. I wouldn't be fighting their will, I would be rendering it irrelevant. I would build my own legacy, a better one, and I would put our family name right on the front of it. I looked at Anya, a real smile touching my lips for the first time in what felt like an eternity. "Anya," I said, my voice filled with a newfound energy, "I think you just gave me an idea, a very big idea." She smiled back, a curious glint in her eyes. "Well, I hope it's a good one." "Oh, it is," I said, the ghost of a plan already solidifying into a concrete resolve. It's the best idea I've ever had. For the first time since walking out of my parents' house, I felt a sense of purpose. The hurt was still there, but now it had a direction. It was no longer a weight pulling me down, it was fuel. The morning after the gala, I woke up feeling a sense of clarity I hadn't experienced in years. The fog of grief had lifted, replaced by the clean, sharp lines of a new project. My parents wanted a legacy, I would give them one. But it would be on my terms, built from my own values. I threw myself into the work with the same intensity I brought to a complex architectural design. The first step was to liquidate a significant portion of my portfolio. My financial advisor was stunned. "David, this is a huge move," he cautioned. "These are long-term, stable investments. Are you sure about this?" "I'm not just sure, I'm certain," I told him, a sense of calm authority in my voice. "I'm making a different kind of investment." The pain of my parents' rejection had a silver lining. It had severed my attachment to the conventional idea of wealth. The money wasn't an abstract number on a screen anymore. It was a tool. It was the raw material I would use to build something that mattered. Next, I met with a team of lawyers specializing in nonprofits. I laid out my vision, a foundation that would provide comprehensive support for underprivileged children. I didn't want it to be just about scholarships. I envisioned mentorship programs, access to arts and technology, and funding for stable, safe after-school environments. I wanted to build a foundation that acted like the safety net these kids deserved but didn't have. "And the names?" one of the lawyers asked, pen poised over his legal pad. "What will you call it?" I didn't hesitate. "The Sterling Grant Foundation," I said. The lawyer raised an eyebrow. "Sterling? Any relation to Robert Sterling of Sterling Properties?" "He's my father," I said plainly. The look on the lawyer's face was a mixture of surprise and curiosity, but he was professional enough not to pry. Using the family name was the linchpin of my plan. It wasn't an act of aggression, but one of reappropriation. The Sterling name would no longer be solely associated with my father's cutthroat real estate empire. It would now also stand for compassion and opportunity. The grant part was my own touch, a simple, powerful word that defined the foundation's entire purpose. While the legal and financial structures were being built, I used my architectural skills to find a physical home for the foundation. I found a neglected two-story brick building in a neighborhood that would be central to the communities we aimed to serve. Instead of tearing it down, I designed a full-scale renovation. I envisioned a bright, modern, and welcoming space with a library, a computer lab, art studios, and quiet rooms for tutoring. The building itself would be a statement that forgotten places and overlooked people could be rebuilt into something beautiful and strong. I managed the project myself, spending my evenings and weekends on site, trading my drafting table for a hard hat. The physical act of construction was cathartic, as if I were literally building my new life from the ground up. Throughout this whirlwind of activity, my connection with Anya deepened. I had called her a few days after the gala to thank her for the inspiration. That call turned into dinner, which turned into many more. She and her 7-year-old son Noah became a steady, joyful presence in my life. I found myself at soccer games on Saturday mornings, cheering for Noah with a genuine enthusiasm that my father had never shown for me. I helped Noah build a ridiculously complex Lego castle that put my own childhood models to shame. One evening, while Anya and I were cooking dinner in my apartment, she watched me sketch out a new idea for the foundation's community garden. "You've completely transformed," she said, her voice soft. "When I first met you, you looked so lost. Now, you look like you're exactly where you're supposed to be." "I feel that way," I admitted, looking up from my sketchpad. "For years, I was trying to fit into a blueprint someone else had designed for me. It never worked. The foundation, this is my design, and you and Noah, you've become my family." The word family came out easily, naturally. It wasn't defined by blood or legacy or inheritance. It was defined by the quiet comfort of her presence, by the sound of Noah's laughter echoing in my apartment, by the simple act of showing up for each other day after day. This new, chosen family fortified my resolve. My plan was no longer fueled by hurt, it was fueled by a profound sense of love and purpose. I wasn't just building a foundation to prove my parents wrong. I was building it because I now believed, with all my heart, that it was the right thing to do. The fact that it would completely upend my parents' world was simply a consequence of me finally living my own truth. The launch of the Sterling Grant Foundation was a quiet affair, marked not by a lavish party, but by a simple press release and a feature story in the city's most respected local newspaper. I had given an exclusive interview to a journalist known for her in-depth human interest pieces. I talked about the Foundation's mission, the importance of community support, and the potential that exists in every child, regardless of their circumstances. I spoke about wanting to create a legacy of opportunity. I never once mentioned my parents or the inheritance. I didn't have to. The Sterling name did all the talking for me. The story was published on a Thursday morning. The headline read, "Architect of a New Generation, David Sterling Builds a Legacy of Hope." It was accompanied by a picture of me, smiling, standing in front of the newly renovated brick building with a group of children who were part of our first pilot program. The fallout was immediate, and it unfolded exactly as I had anticipated. The first ripple was social. My parents moved in circles where reputation and public perception were everything. Suddenly, their friends and business associates were calling them not to talk about real estate deals, but to praise their son. My mother's closest friend, Margaret, was the first to unintentionally draw blood. As my mother later recounted to Ethan, who, in a moment of panic, relayed the conversation to me, Margaret had gushed, "Carol, darling, I just saw the article. How wonderful of David. We had no idea he was so philanthropic. You and Robert must be bursting with pride. Are you on the board? You must be so involved in such a noble cause bearing the family name." My mother was caught completely off guard. To admit they had no involvement, that they hadn't given a single dollar, would be a social humiliation. To lie would be to invite more questions they couldn't answer. According to Ethan, she mumbled something noncommittal and quickly ended the call, her voice trembling with a mixture of anger and embarrassment. The pressure mounted. At my father's country club, his associates clapped him on the back, congratulating him on his son's incredible foundation. They saw it as a brilliant move in dynastic management, the tough businessman father and the compassionate philanthropist son, a perfect pairing that covered all public relations bases. My father, a man who prided himself on being in absolute control, was rendered speechless. The narrative was spinning away from him, and I was the one writing it. His legacy, which he had so carefully curated around strength and financial dominance, was now being publicly redefined by the son he had written off. While my parents were navigating this social minefield, the second, more critical part of the reversal began. Ethan, their chosen heir and the vessel of their dynastic dreams, had made a catastrophic financial mistake. For months, he had been pouring money, both his own and a significant sum loaned from our parents, into a high-risk tech startup that a friend had promised was the next big thing. The call I received from him was one I'll never forget. His voice was thin and reedy, stripped of its usual breezy confidence. "David, I'm in trouble, real trouble." He explained in a frantic torrent of words that the startup had folded overnight. The founders had vanished and the investment was gone, all of it. He was not only broke, he was deeply in debt to a number of private lenders he had borrowed from to double down on his sure thing. "I haven't told Mom and Dad the full extent of it," he confessed, his voice cracking. "They know about the initial investment, but they don't know about the loans. David, they're going to be ruined. The amount I owe, it would take a huge chunk of their retirement savings to fix this." I listened calmly, a strange sense of detachment washing over me. This was the man for whom I had been deemed unworthy. This was the responsible family man who was supposed to be the steward of the Sterling legacy, and he had gambled it away on a whim. "What do you want me to do, Ethan?" I asked, my voice even. "I don't know," he cried, his panic escalating. "Talk to them, maybe. Maybe you could help your foundation. You're good with money, right? You could advise me." The irony was staggering. He was turning to me, the cast-off son, for the very stability and prudence that was supposed to be his forte. The two threads of my plan were now converging into a perfect storm for my parents. On one side, they faced mounting social pressure and the embarrassment of my public success, a success that shone a harsh light on their own values. On the other, their carefully laid financial plans for the future were crumbling, brought down by the recklessness of their favored son. They were trapped. Their obsession with their legacy had led them to a point where the legacy itself was at risk, and the only person who seemed to have any control over the Sterling name and its future was the son they had tried to erase. The begging, I suspected, was not far off. The call came from my father a week after my conversation with Ethan. His voice, usually so booming and confident, was subdued. "David, we need to see you, it's important." There was no command in his tone this time, only a raw, undisguised desperation. We agreed to meet at my apartment, my turf, not theirs. It was a small but significant shift in the balance of power. When I opened the door, I was stunned by their appearance. My father, Robert, seemed to have aged a decade. His shoulders were slumped, the stern lines on his face deepened by worry. My mother, Carol, who always looked immaculately put together, had faint, dark circles under her eyes, and her usual placid expression was replaced by one of anxious pleading. They looked smaller, frailer, stripped of the imposing authority they had always wielded over me. They looked broken. I led them into my living room, the heart of the life I had built for myself. The walls were lined with books and prints from my travels. On a side table, there was a framed picture of me, Anya, and Noah at a fall festival, all of us laughing. My mother's eyes darted to it, a flicker of something unreadable in her expression. They sat on my sofa, looking deeply uncomfortable. It was my father who finally broke the silence, his voice heavy with a humility I had never heard from him before. David, he began, struggling to meet my eyes. We were wrong. What we did, what we said to you, it was a terrible mistake. My mother nodded, tears welling in her eyes. We were so focused on this idea of legacy, of bloodline, we were blind, she whispered. We saw the article about your foundation, what you've built. It's incredible. It's more of a legacy than we ever could have imagined. We are so proud of you. The words I had longed to hear my entire life were finally being spoken. But hearing them now, they felt hollow, delivered not from a place of genuine change, but from a place of desperation. It was too little, far too late. And Ethan, my father continued, his voice cracking. He told us everything, the bad investments, the debt. He's lost everything, David. He stands to lose his house. So there it was, the other shoe had dropped. Their pride was secondary to their panic. We came here today to ask for your forgiveness, my father said, leaning forward, his hands clasped together in a pleading gesture. And to make things right, we've already spoken to our lawyer. We are tearing up the old will. We want to draft a new one. We want to make you the primary beneficiary, the majority shareholder. Whatever you want, David, it's yours. It should have been yours all along. I sat in my armchair across from them, calm and silent, letting their desperate offer hang in the thick air between us. I thought of the boy who won the science fair, of the young man who graduated with honors, of the son who just wanted a pat on the back. That person was gone. He had walked out of their house months ago and had never returned. Finally, I spoke. My voice quiet but firm. It was never about the money. They both looked at me, confused. I don't want your money, I continued. I don't want your will. I don't want to be your primary beneficiary. But David, my mother stammered, we're trying to fix this. We want to give you what you deserve. What I deserved, I said, my gaze steady, was your respect, your love, your approval, not as an investment for the future but as your son. You weren't able to give me that. The money was always just a symptom of the problem, a way for you to keep score, and I'm not playing that game anymore. I stood up and walked over to the window, looking out at the city lights. My foundation is succeeding. I'm building something that helps people. That is my legacy, and my family. I turned back and gestured toward the photo on the table. My family is with Anya and Noah. They give me the love and support you never could, with no conditions attached. I looked back at my parents, their faces a canvas of shock and despair. They had come here with their ultimate bargaining chip, the inheritance, believing it was the one thing that could mend the chasm they had created. They had fundamentally misunderstood the nature of the wound. Use your money to help Ethan, I told them, my voice softening with a surprising wave of pity. He's your son and he needs you. Bail him out. That's what your legacy is for, right? To support your bloodline. But my relationship with you, it can't be bought back. It can't be rewritten like a will. I forgive you, not for your sake, but for mine, so I can move on. But I will not go back to being the son who waits for his parents' approval. That part of my life is over. They sat in stunned silence, the truth of my words settling upon them like a shroud. They had lost. They hadn't just lost the argument or a negotiation, they had lost their son. They had come to me broken and begging, and I had turned them away not with anger but with a quiet, unshakable peace. They had nothing left to offer me, because the one thing I had always wanted was the one thing they had willingly thrown away. 6 months passed and the seasons changed. The frantic energy of launching the foundation settled into a steady, productive rhythm. The Sterling Grant building became a vibrant hub of activity and hope in the neighborhood. We had a waiting list for our mentorship program, and the success stories were already starting to trickle in. A young girl who discovered a passion for coding in our computer lab. A teenage boy who received a grant that allowed him to be the first in his family to attend college. Every small victory felt more valuable than any inheritance. My work was no longer just a job, it was a calling. My parents did what I told them to do. They liquidated a massive portion of their assets to pay off Ethan's debts and salvage his family's finances. Ethan and Jessica had to sell their condo and move into a much smaller home, a humbling and necessary reset. My relationship with my brother was polite but distant. He was grateful, but the old dynamic of the golden child and the forgotten son had been so thoroughly broken that we no longer knew how to talk to each other. He saw me now as some sort of untouchable figure, a man who had outmaneuvered our parents and the fates themselves. He didn't understand that I hadn't been playing a game, I had simply been building a life. As for my parents, they were adrift. Their world, once so clearly defined by wealth, legacy, and their favored son, had been shattered. They had their money or what was left of it, but their purpose was gone. Their legacy was now inextricably tied to my foundation, a project they had no part in, and their future was tied to a son who now saw them merely as a financial backstop. They sometimes called me, their conversations stilted and full of an awkward deference. They would ask about the foundation, about Anya, about Noah, grasping for a connection to the world I had built without them. I was never unkind, but I was no longer theirs to claim. The profound pity I felt for them was the final sign that I had truly moved on. My life, on the other hand, had never been fuller. My relationship with Anya had blossomed into a deep and loving partnership. We were a team in every sense of the word, and Noah, with his endless energy and infectious laugh, had become my son in all the ways that mattered. One crisp autumn afternoon, the three of us were carving pumpkins on the floor of my living room. Newspaper spread everywhere, the scent of cinnamon and nutmeg in the air from the pie Anya was baking. Noah held up his lopsided, crookedly smiling pumpkin. "Look, David, he looks happy." I smiled back at him, my heart swelling with a kind of quiet, profound joy I had never known was possible. "He sure does, buddy." Anya caught my eye from across the room, her smile warm and knowing. In that simple, messy, perfect moment, I saw my future. It wasn't in a grand mansion or a legal document. It was right here in this room with these people. It was a legacy not of wealth or blood, but of love, choice, and resilience. My parents had told me I didn't have a family, and in their narrow, transactional world, they were right. I didn't have the family they recognized, so I went out and built my own. I learned that a true inheritance isn't something that is left to you, it's what you leave behind in the hearts of others. My parents were left with their broken dreams and their devalued fortune, forever begging for a connection they themselves had severed. And I was left with everything that truly mattered. So for anyone out there who has been made to feel like they are not enough, that they don't fit into their family's plan, I want you to hear this. Your worth is not determined by someone else's definition of success or legacy. Sometimes, the greatest act of love is to love yourself enough to walk away and draw your own blueprint for happiness. After listening to today's story, perhaps it has raised some new questions in your mind. Every day on Reddit, new experiences and moments create fresh stories. We are all human, navigating the complex map of relationships and expectations. If you enjoyed this story, feel free to share it with someone who might find a piece of their own experience within these words. Thank you for your time, and don't forget to keep an eye out for more stories coming soon.